Throughout history, there have been many different execution methods deployed and used against criminals who have been found guilty of committing a very serious offence. During the reign of King Henry VIII, the notorious six-wifed king even changed the laws of England to allow him to boil alive those who were convicted of poisoning. This was something he greatly feared, and he treated the offence by matching it to a sinister and harrowing execution ordeal. But it was common inside of London and in European cities during the medieval period and the years following to see the bodies of people being suspended high in the air in what was known as a gibbet cage. This was an iron crate which was used to display the remains of someone, or was used as an execution method, as someone was locked inside the crate alive and was then left to rot. Welcome to the Fortress. Today we look at the gibbet cage, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Gibbeting was a use of the gallows-like structure in which the remains of someone was displayed on for some time. It was usually condemned criminals who were subjected to this, and the point was to put other people off committing serious offences and crimes. Across England there were gibbet posts to put people off committing highway robbery, as this was a great fear, so thieves' rotting corpses would be displayed for months, even years. In England it was a common law punishment, and could be placed upon someone as well as an execution, meaning that the display of their remains or the gibbeting would be an additional extra. The practice of gibbeting was mostly used as mentioned against robbers, murderers, and even pirates, with Captain Kidd, the infamous pirate, being subjected to it, and he was hanged in chains for some time on the banks of the River Thames to send a warning to other seafarers not to indulge in acts of piracy. But specifically cages were used for this, large metal structures in which at times were human shape, and these could be placed high up into the air. The gibbet cage was described by one man as, the body was encased in flat bars of iron of 2.5 inches in breadth. The feet were placed in stirrups from which a bar of iron went up each side of the head and ended in a ring by which he was suspended. A bar from the collar went down to the breast and another down the back, and there were also bars in the insides of the legs which communicated with the above, and crossbars at the ankles, the knees, the thighs, the bowels, the breast, and the shoulders. The hands were hung by the side and covered with pitch. The face was pitched and covered with a piece of white cloth. Usually the cage was 1 foot wide, and there were strong iron bars up each side, and this would be placed high up in the air, and there was no way of escaping. In the city of Leicester, one man named James Cook was subjected to gibbeting, and he was executed on the 10th of August 1832 in front of Leicester Prison. It was said after his execution that the head was shaved and tarred to reserve it for the action of the weather, and the cap in which he had suffered was drawn over his head. On Saturday afternoon his body attired as the time of his execution, having been firmly fixed in the irons necessary to keep the limbs together, was carried to the place of its intended suspension. Specifically, his body was displayed on a purpose-built 10-metre high structure near to Tollgate, and it was said of this that thousands of persons were attracted to the spot to view this novel but most barbarous exhibition, and considerable annoyance was felt by persons resident in the neighbourhood of the dreadful scene. Representations were in consequence made to the authorities, and on the following Tuesday morning instructions were received from the Home Office directing the removal of the gibbet. But hanging a body in chains post or pre-execution and death was a punishment method used for serious offenders in Britain, and there were different smuggling gangs who were sentenced to death for it in the 18th century. The bodies of these men were distributed around the local area so that everybody could see the bodies in different towns and settlements. There were some accounts of people being hanged in chains throughout the years too, and this was also referred to as being placed inside of a gibbet. These people were usually thrown over the side of a castle's walls in a chain, or sometimes being suspended in chains, and they would be exposed to the elements for weeks, days, months, until they succumbed to their ordeal. Usually the remains of someone would be left and then picked at by crows and other birds, and eventually only bones would be left, and these would fall from the gibbet. Displaying someone in such a way at times could be detrimental to the monarchy, as if a king or queen was unpopular, this sort of treatment was known to have been rather barbaric. For example, there were rebels during the reign of Edward II who were drawn and hanged in chains, being exhibited on a gibbet, and the people in the area later made relics from the remains of these men, which were greatly mutilated, and the relics were then used in violent protest against the king. Some locals even claimed that near to gibbets that miracles happened, and this was seen as further evidence to rebel against the king. The key point of using the gibbet cage was to put people off serious crimes. If they had to pass by the rotting remains of the dying condemned every single day, suspended high in the air, then it's likely when it came to committing offences, then they would think twice about this. But some people absolutely detested the use of the gibbet cage. For example, the diarist Samuel Pepys hated it, and he stated that there was something unchristian about it, and that the ordeal of the condemned should end with their death, and not the posthumous display of their remains. Local people who lived near to where gibbet cages could be suspended high up often complained about the smell and what the decaying remains were doing. At the time, many people believed that bad smells caused disease and illness, and people linked the display of remains in the gibbet cages to bouts of disease that broke out across the nation. In London, as mentioned, on the banks of the River Thames, pirates were hanged in chains and were gibbeted to send a warning to those on the river not to embark upon pirate actions. One part of London in Wapping became known as Execution Dock because the criminals' bodies were suspended high up there in cages, and this practice continued all the way down the river. It was a gruesome reminder for people to stay under the laws of the nation. But some unfortunate criminals even had their bodies sliced into different parts during the executions, and these body parts would then be displayed in cages, being gibbeted in different towns and cities. Body-shaped cages were used to contain people, and if someone was alive then the ordeal would be shocking, and each day would hear them scream for help and food. People did take pity on those, but truth be told, by giving food to those people suspended in the gibbet cage, it only prolonged their ordeal and suffering, and was not as humanitarian as you would probably think. Ordeals within the gibbet could go on for months on end, and this was something which was used all across the world. Gibbet cages were either part of an execution ordeal or a posthumous ordeal for those criminals who were sentenced to death. It was a common sight across Britain and inside of towns and cities to pass between settlements where remains of criminals were gibbeted. The law and order of the times seemed to be more focused on deterring people committing crimes than anything, and the use of a gibbet cage was one way that people were put off doing serious crimes. But could you imagine on your walk home from work, passing by a cage high up in the air, where someone would be literally slowly dying and succumbing to an execution ordeal, but then one day all of a sudden their screams and moaning would not be heard anymore. Slowly over time their remains would rot until only a set of bones fell through the cage. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.